Ukraine, full of destinations. Where am I going to go? I picked a random destination. Decided I'm going to go to Zhytomyr. In English it might be Zhytomyr, but I think it's in Ukrainian Russian it's Zhytomyr. So I'm going to get the train to Lviv, ride a few stops, and I'll be in Zhytomyr. Never been there before, so join me on that journey.
Nettle beer and Scholz.
In Zhytomyr. I hope I'm saying that right, Zhytomyr residence. And I think like the phoenix rises from the ashes. I see that happening in Ukraine. I believed in family values as opposed to corrupt, progressive values. My carriage is number 16, so right to the back. Cheapest ticket they had, I think. The only ticket they had. Just before we leave and it gets a bit crowded, just to give you an idea of what I think this is a, let me just check. This is a second class ticket and economic. What this basically means is people have been coming in, I think from Western Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, because we're going west, and possibly coming all the way from Bakhmut, and they've been sleeping probably. This is mine. I'm only going 2.5 hours, so I'm not going to be sleeping. The hope is that no one's on the bottom and then you can sit down properly, but it doesn't look that way. Every bed is taken. Yeah, every bed is taken, so I'm going to have to be perched up here, unless of course when they get back on the train they're going to fold up their sheets and I can sit down as well. That is the hope anyway. Well, I'll be honest, that is a very, very hot train. I had to have all of my clothes off while inside the train. I'm not at the back of the train, so my carriage is the last carriage on the train. And what's interesting about Ukrainian train companies, the carriages are split into different companies. So you'll walk from carriage to carriage, and it will be owned by different train companies. Sometimes you'll find that this carriage will split and go in that direction, or this carriage will split and go in another direction. But each carriage, different company and different standard. This one, no air conditioning. The journey is 2 and a bit hours. Maybe it'll be cooler at the back, but it turns out this is where the carriage gets its electricity, its heating. I think it's a coal-powered electricity, but this is possibly the reason that is such a hot carriage. Well, just sometime after 4 o'clock, I arrive in my destination, relieved to be off the train. I can actually breathe again. It was just too damn hot. It was just so hot on that carriage. Now, not every carriage is like that. It really is the luck of the draw, and to be honest, if you opt to spend a little bit more, which sometimes is about 10 times the price, you will get a nicer carriage. Each carriage is slightly different. But let's go have a look at this town. Well, let's discover what most people choose not to discover in Zhytomyr. I hope I'm saying that right, Zhytomyr residence. I will soon be corrected otherwise. Let's have a look. Well, this seems to be the main street that sort of runs pretty much from the station and all the way down to where we presume will be the centre. Somewhere on the street, I'm going to find a bed for the night, and then I'm going to explore for the next 24 hours at least. All the kind of little shops that you could need, not glamorous. Nothing about this town strikes me as glamorous to begin with, but you want to get some beer. Put your beer here. Some perspective on prices. There's 80 hryvnia for a haircut. Now I'm not sure what kind of haircut you're going to get, and I certainly don't need a haircut these days. 80 hryvnia. That's £2.10, £2.20. About just under $3. A rule about arriving at a hotel where the babushka is in charge. Don't attempt to try and pay with credit card or debit card. They won't take it. And if you want to bribe them with sterling, pounds or dollars, they won't take that out either. So my ambition now is trying to find some cash for the babushka that doesn't understand a word I'm saying with my broken Russian and my Google Translate. But thankfully she's now got my passport and my sterling. I need some cash. Well, once again I find myself in a mall trying to find an ATM. Not an ATM in sight. They do love their malls around here. Possibly slightly dated, but it's a mall nonetheless and very busy. But this is not what we came to see. We came to see a town, not a mall. Alright, I can now relax. Hryvnia is withdrawn from the bank. They only charged me 120 hryvnias. That's actually quite a lot, to be honest. Some banks charge you nothing, but this one charged me 120 hryvnias, which is quite an expensive transaction. It leaves me a little bit perturbed. So far, this place strikes me as how I imagined Soviet cities would be. Ridiculous town planning with straight roads and incredibly ugly buildings with the odd sort of obscure, let's try and make the place nice. This. As we get to the centre, let's hope that the centre is more rewarding. We should never judge a city on the roads that flood into the city. Judge it on its centre, also judge it on the people. No issues yet, but it does feel a bit different. As we walk along this main road into town, I can reflect on what this city is about and what brought me here. Well, other than wondering what every single city in Ukraine is like, which is probably one of the main reasons to come here, it is actually, despite its appearances, steeped in a lot of history. It was originally founded back in the 9th century, at least there's signs that of a settlement here in the 9th century. It was sacked by the Mongols, Batu Khan, in I think the 13th century. They came through here, rampaged, completely destroyed the whole place. The settlers had to start all over again, having had their women raped, their men decapitated, some men taken into the service of the Mongols, and some men just left to rot. This was a situation where much of this region, after that we had the Duchy of Lithuania, he took over this region, and then centuries go by, and of course we had the Ukrainian-Polish War, and for a brief time this city, for at least a few weeks, was independent. It was sort of around about 1919 it was independent, and then look at the beautiful chimney stacks with the 5G masks, 4G masks, or whatever you like to call them. And then this beautiful public building here. This is the first beautiful building I've seen since being here. So once the independence was lost to the Soviets, Soviet occupation took over the entire country of Ukraine, including this area. And then of course the Nazis came in 1941. And with that, the people of this city didn't know what was about to hit them with 1941. If only they'd known, I think we would have probably had a flood of refugees coming out of Ukraine and spilling into the rest of the world, because this was one of the cities that was probably the most hit when it came to complete annihilation of the local population. Heinrich Himmler had his base here, and it was here where he conducted experiments on the local population, and conducted his extermination tactics on the local population. His ambition effectively was to rid much of the population of the land. He felt they weren't needed. And then, of course, as the war came to an end and this region was freed up in 1944, and then eventually the war ended in 45, the Soviets brutalized the people of this region, the people that had just been suffering for years and years, and the ones that survived the Nazi occupation, they then had to endure the Soviet occupation with the large famine that would then take place as Stalin would move all the food to Moscow and Russia, taking it away from the Ukrainian people. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that there's something very enduring about the Ukrainian people. They've been shat upon so many times in their history, and it's not because these people are weak. If you go back to when the Mongols sacked them, they were fighting large men on horseback with large swords. People that look, the Ukrainian boxers that you see dominating the boxing scene are a pretty good representation of a lot of the men around here. Look, Ukrainian man here. They have broad shoulders, they're strong individuals. But for some reason, given their geographical location of having occupiers storm through, they have really suffered over the centuries. And I'd like to think that as the country embraces tech and as the country sort of gets more on board with, well, hopefully there won't be any more land movements of people where occupiers storm into Ukraine. I'd like to think Ukraine builds itself from the ashes. And I think like the phoenix rises from the ashes. I see that happening in Ukraine. You might not see it when you look at these incredibly ugly buildings with these Soviet tiles which are sporadically falling off. But in terms of opportunity, the Ukrainian people are strong, they've endured a lot, and the ones that have survived this far, I think they could achieve. I would never bet against these people, because Himmler tried to wipe them out, the Mongols tried to wipe them out, and they endured Soviet occupation. Don't bet against these people, and don't underestimate them when you see buildings as, well, sarcasm here, as beautiful as these. Obviously, originally this man used to have a head, but because it effectively represents Soviet occupation, which occurred in 1919, the man no longer has a head. A lot of statues were obviously toppled as the breakup of the Soviet Union happened and Ukraine became more independent. Hopefully we won't get a copyright claim here. There were some very interesting sculptures on the side of this astonishingly concrete building. I mean, I like this. It's space race in a way. I mean, it has to be said, a very busy town in terms of traffic. It's the first pedestrian area I've seen so far. We could check it out, but I think we're going to go check out the monument. Very Soviet cinema. Maybe I wonder if it used to be a theatre, but it's certainly a cinema now. And this chap, now obviously I had no idea who this chap was until a few minutes ago, was a character in a novel, and apparently he was born and he came from this town, and legend has it, as you can see, the bit most touched on the statue is the envelope. If you make a wish while holding the envelope, locals say it will come true. So let's make a wish, shall we? Should we wish together? How cheesy is that? This magnificent building is actually a Catholic church, and given that most churches in the region, including the blue one we saw back there, are Orthodox, the city has a large number of Catholics. The reason being that there's a lot of Polish citizens in this city. Let's go and have a look. There's a service song there, so I'm very quiet. Similar to church to what my nana would once love to go to. And here we have the cross of Jesus. It's nice to see such a large Catholic church in Ukraine. Well, we remember the Catholic church that was burnt down in Kyiv. Thankfully this one hasn't suffered the same fate, and hopefully it will not. Despite the Catholic church problems, it does provide a lot of good to the local community, especially to the local babushkas. It gives them comfort. Everyone needs that comfort as they get older. The central square, Soviet architecture around the edges, not so pretty, but at least, and I imagine this was probably the theatre over here, and the beautiful Ukrainian flag flying proudly. Once hammer and sickle would have flown up there. It doesn't really have the character or finesse of many of the recent cities I've visited. Looks like there's a Orthodox church that way. Go have a look. Let's just continue down here. Sadly not the theatre, but a government building. Possibly has always been a government building. You can imagine the red tape that goes on in there. All the paper clips and staplers and let's sign this document to pass on to the next room. It still goes on. One of the disadvantages is about Ukraine, administration hasn't certainly caught up with the rest of the world. There is still a lot of red tape, but then saying that, there's red tape in every country. US, when they're spending trillions on their annual budget, tells you a lot that there's red tape in the US as well. Really, this is the first bit of natural beauty I've seen in the city. That with the larder, lady walking her dogs. Now some say when the city was founded in 1884, it was founded with this stone out of the glacier that left it behind. And as the ice thawed and the city was able to sort of build its foundations, this is where it all began. And to be honest, this is a very charming monument. I have to admit, I like it. Peaceful park. And here you'll notice that as we look out, this is the Castle Hill observation deck, and you will notice all of the trees in the background. Apparently the whole area is surrounded by trees, and I did notice that as I was coming in on the train, that we were effectively going through forests like this. And in a way, I guess if this was called Castle Hill observational deck, maybe there used to be a castle here looking out for any unexpected intruders. Many obviously came in the hope that, you know, they could warn the locals. But I think as it's getting dark, I don't have high tech when it comes to looking at monuments in the dark, and it's not much fun. I'm going to try and get up early to see as much as possible on what's left of this city. Depending on if I have an encounter with some unruly Ukrainians and they end up getting me drunk once again, that is the ambition for tomorrow. So it all depends on who I meet tonight. Before I dip my toes into the local beer, or vodka maybe, I think beer is preference, I wanted to make a little trip to this monument. He's long gone, but this is John Paul II. He was my nana's favourite pope, and to be honest, he is the pope that I always consider the pope, because he was around when I was a boy. To be honest, a damn sight better than the current pope. I personally believe the current pope is all very political. He doesn't really go the way of the Christian values in terms of protecting the church. He would rather change Europe and the world, in my opinion, progressive liberal values that are, this is where you're going to think I'm a little bit strange, but slightly satanic. You only got to look at the new hall where the Pope does his sermons to think there's something very wrong there, when the hall looks like a reptile, it looks like a snake. And then look at the ornaments behind him as he's doing his services, and also look to see who the current Pope bows to. You'll notice that most people will always bow to the Pope, even if you're not from the Catholic religion. But our current Pope has been seen on more than one occasion bowing to the Rothschilds, the world's richest family. It tells you everything you need to know, if you ask me. I'm not sure if he did the same, maybe he did. He struck me as a more traditional, family-orientated, believed in family values as opposed to corrupt, progressive values. It's got to be the craft beer place.
Nettle beer at Scholz. And the white Pils lager. Also good. Presentation in Ukraine, it's just amazing. This is beer place, great presentation.
The worst part about navigating around Ukraine is the temperature extremes. For example, I was on the train today at 40 degrees, and right now it's probably -2 degrees. It's freezing. And I have 2 layers of long johns on, 2 jackets on, and I'm still cold. The old favourite, the cherry place. Let's warm up with a cherry liqueur, I think. Good morning on this very cold morning. It is freezing. I've got 2 pairs of long johns on, about 4 layers on my top half, 3 on my lower half, or 4 actually. And for you guys, I'm going to try to see what's left of this remarkable town. I have to say the The nightlife didn't leave much to be desired last night. But let's see if the morning here saves us. I already am expecting to leave because I've already got my bag. I thought, normally when I think the town has a lot to offer, I'll stick around for another night or something. But I'm feeling this town doesn't have too much to offer, but let's see. I could change my mind. Behind me is the monument to remember the victims of Holodomor. This is the Holodomor monument in Zhytomyr, and as you would expect from a monument of such atrocities, it's poignant that the angel is crying, and maybe it's fitting that I'm here as the leaves start falling, because when you hear about what happened to the Ukrainian people and you hear about Holodomor, it's hard not to have a tear to your eye, or your eyes. And I genuinely mean that. Between 7 to 10 million people died thanks to the communist regime of the USSR, thanks to Joseph Stalin, effectively starving the Ukrainian people between 1932 and 1933. He did that due to the collectivization that is communism, forcing farm workers and people who live in villages and people who live in towns to collectivize and bring their food up towards the communist government, to bring their food up into the Central Soviet Union, effectively making it a crime to hoard food or steal food. And in doing so, the people of the Ukrainian region at the time, all over Ukraine this happened. First reports of starvation were heard in Uman, then eastern in Kharkiv, Kyiv, and especially in this region, which is one of the reasons we have this memorial to remember the victims of the Holodomor. It wasn't just the 7 to 10 million victims who died from starvation, because Holodomor basically means forced starvation or forced famine. Ring any bells as the globalists around the world start to reduce movement, which is what the Holodomor was about, the reduction of movement. If your village was blacklisted, you couldn't move out of the village to try and get food. I just spent the last 4 miles walking here on a hungry stomach just to get a sense of what it may have been like, just briefly, because the reality is none of us can imagine what it is to face starvation, what it is to have to resort to cannibalism. Many people, just to survive, would end up eating the people who had died around them. 2,500 people were convicted by the Soviet regime for cannibalism. So that probably means a lot more people turned to cannibalism. But can you blame them? These people had nothing. These people, due to communism and due to their nationalist beliefs and their desire to want to have an independent Ukraine, were punished by Joseph Stalin, and something like 1 in 8 Ukrainian people died in the space between 1932 and 1933. And on top of that, not only did the 7 to 10 million people die, people born after Holodomor or during Holodomor had birth defects, had reduced size, because if you survived it, if you were a child during that time, you certainly weren't getting the nutrients you needed to grow into a sort of strong adult. So it's really impacted people for generations. And yet communism, which so many morons in the West cheer about, is what caused this. And I don't think we can forget this. And to be honest, it's a fitting statue and it's a fitting monument to remember all the victims. In a way, it's not enough. What Ukrainian city would be complete without a beautiful statue of the great man Taras Shevchenko? Now, I'm sure if any of you are regular viewers and you've seen my other videos, you would have witnessed the great man Taras Shevchenko, so I don't really want to repeat myself on the fact that he was the Ukrainians' Robert Burns, the national poet. He is a phenomenal figure. Maybe it's probably more interesting to give a sort of brief fact on Taras Shevchenko. He obviously was born in 1814. He was born into serfdom, something that social justice warriors around the world are very ignorant about. Yes, the white man for centuries was treated as a slave. And for centuries in this part of the world, you were effectively the property of a richer person. Now, at the age of 24, having been a serf for effectively 24 years, Taras Shevchenko had seen his store of suffering. He had witnessed hardship. He had seen the hardship around him. But he was considered at the time, and he was considered by his master, I believe was a guy called Engelbert. He was considered a great artist, to the extent that a group of artists got together and paid for the release of Taras Shevchenko. So at the age of 24, this phenomenal writer, poet, and like I say again, a nationalist, became a free man. What's really, really ironic is in 1861, when he died, I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the fact that he died. He was against serfdom. He was against people being treated as serfs or being the property of another man or another woman. A few months later, it came to an end. There were no more serfs after 1861. A few months after he died, the man achieved a lot. He's loved a lot, as we can see, with this beautiful statue here on this crossroads, strangely on the edge of the town. But maybe for everyone to remember the guy. But what I really, really love is the fact that every time I go to a different Ukrainian city or a Ukrainian town, he is there. He's in everyone's mind, and he's very much loved. And I like that. Franko. You may remember him from Ternopil, and we may remember him from Lviv. He was born in this region. He's a very interesting character, a very accomplished individual. It seems individuals back then certainly accomplished far more than individuals in the present day. He was a writer, he was a poet, he was a philosopher, he was an ethnographer. He achieved a lot, and yet strangely he spent most of his later years living in poverty, to the degree that 14 years before he died, I think in 1902, he was living in Lviv, and his students were so embarrassed to see him in poverty they actually bought him a house. Now that house you can now still visit today. It's in Lviv. It's the Ivan Franko Museum. He's much celebrated in present day Ukraine, where there's streets and there's towns named after him. And he's even on the 20 hryvnia banknote. That is him there. That's the younger him. But strangely, when he died in 1916, no family came to his funeral. No one was really there. He was on a table in rags. And yet, 2 years after his death in 1916, what he had been writing about for years, the struggle of the Ukrainians and his hatred for Marxism and his desire for an independent Ukraine, finally came true, because in 1918 Ukraine briefly was an independent nation. However, of course, it wasn't until 1990 did Ukraine really fully get the status of an independent nation after the fall of the Soviet Union. And because of this, a man that wrote and he was imprisoned because he was a nationalist. He was also a socialist, but he hated Marxism. He really hated Marxism with a passion. He wanted an independent Ukraine. Eventually, Ukraine is that. So it is one of the reasons he's celebrated, and it is one of the reasons we will find his statue here and all over Ukraine. It's like paint by numbers, isn't it? There's no Ukrainian city is complete without the correct number of statues and the correct statues in the city. And what city would not be complete without this fine man looking down one of the promenades and looking down onto the people? This is obviously, of course, Alexander Pushkin. And you might remember from my video in Kropyevsky, where I talk about briefly I talk about the life of Alexander Pushkin. What I found amazing actually was when I spoke to some Russian people recently and some Ukrainian people recently about Alexander Pushkin, who is celebrated in both countries because he was obviously born in Russia. Few didn't realize he was effectively mixed race. His grandfather, of course, was a black man, and he was a very much celebrated black man. And Alexander Pushkin writes in one of his poems that his grandfather was actually sold into service for a bottle of rum. Now, I don't know how true that is. It may be an embellishment on the truth, but it possibly is true given the time frame and given the fact that even when Alexander was around, serfdom existed and slavery existed. So possibly it was true. So 2 generations before being his grandfather, very much true. But Alexander talks of his roots, and he talks of his love for his African heritage. And that's one thing I think needs to be pointed out, because there's a lot of people that dismiss Ukraine and dismiss Russia thinking it is a racist nation, and it isn't. I haven't seen any degree of racism to the point that we have people like this, Alexander Pushkin, a celebrated radical writer, celebrated throughout Russia, Ukraine, and various of the ex-Soviet bloc countries. And I think this is a beautiful statue. This is probably one of the more beautiful Afghanistan monuments. Really, really detailed information here. It tells you the year that they died, when they were born, but it's done slightly differently. How many stars they had. 1980 these people died, and I'm pretty sure they were from here. And we've even got the map of Afghanistan here. A complete pointless exercise. But this is the world we live in. People make money out of war. I'm not going to start ranting about Afghanistan again. I've done that too many times in my videos. Away from the busy streets, the town becomes a lot more pleasant. The car does no favors to any city. I love what they've done with the musical instruments, the old musical instruments. Well, I'm trying to get to that plane in the undergrowth along this busy highway. I think these cracked steps sort of sum up what this monument might be. My understanding from looking at the monument, well, not the monument, the MiG, is it's in an undergrowth forest on the edge of this city, and it's kind of been forgotten because in a way the MiG represents Soviet technology, But I don't think the people who fought bravely and flew bravely with these MiGs should be forgotten. So we're going to go have a look. Put my bag down and take in this MiG. Now, I'm not an expert on planes, but my understanding, the MiG-15, which looks similar to this, now this has got 25 on it, but the MiG-15 looks similar to this, first appeared during the Korean War, and it wasn't even supposed to exist back then, but it did. It appeared and outsmarted the Americans who were with their planes. It was technologically more advanced back then. It's a shame that the youth, the brain dead, the Banksy wannabes, not quite the same talent, have desecrated this monument. You can tell it's seen better days. Maybe it means the same. Bepa hot Bepra. Does that mean Bepra is hot for Bepra? I'm not sure. I would like to see the mayor of this town improve this monument. I doubt that's going to happen, but a beautiful monument. It's a shame it's overgrown. Despite the fact that I love trees, I can imagine the view there is quite decent considering that's where the town is.
Honestly, a big thank you for making it this far in the video. I want to thank every single one of you who has subscribed over the years, and a massive thank you to the members of this channel and those that support via Subscribestar, Patreon, Ko-fi, PayPal, and even crypto these days. Your support has really given me the motivation to continue making these videos despite the YouTube gods not favouring this content. Wishful thinking, but if you haven't clicked that like button, it may help this video be seen by more people, and that really helps me out. Do stick around to the end of the video. We're almost there, but not quite there.
Well, on this incredibly windswept mound, we find this beautiful statue to remember the fallen and the brave, and right opposite it we have the eternal flame. Now I'm staying here because just about I'm sheltered from the wind, and I don't want too much wind muffling this. As you will remember from all of my videos, when I focus in on individual cities, most of them will have the eternal flame. A couple of cities that we've recently witnessed do not have it in service, but this one, thankfully, the eternal flame is still eternal. Over there, a dam, possibly supplying some of the electricity to this wonderful city. And it is rather beautiful, actually. I mean, once you get away from the busy roads which seem to cut through this city quite violently, the quieter parts of this city, well, the best way to describe them, neglected, but at the same time with that neglect comes beauty. And as you can see, this once was, or still is, a very picturesque area. Well, that was my adventure in Zhytomyr. Just got a bus into this incredibly pleasant roadway. The metro is here. I've just arrived in Kyiv. If you'd like to continue with my adventures, you know what to do. Click that like button, click the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video. And thank you very much to the residents of Zhytomyr. I didn't meet many of you. The ones I did meet, pleasure. Hopefully
hopefully my video hasn't put off anyone from going. If you do want to go to Zhytomyr, my recommendation is you get a bus, because it was far quicker getting the bus from Zhytomyr. I'm saying it completely wrong. Destroying it. From Zhytomyr to Kyiv than it was getting in the train from Kyiv to there. Anyway, until next time, keep progressing, and I'll see you next time.